it's Tuesday. I mean, I talked to you guys over the weekend. I told you Tuesday is going to be the day when we're going to get some clarity, right? Over the weekend, we were very good at speaking to one another in understanding that if Charles's win over Benny was, in fact, a number one contenders match, which I have never heard with my ears be stated. I've heard many of you say it. I've read the comments where you've said it. I've seen many publicists who have said that. But I never heard a person in position of authority say that Charles versus Benny was a number one contenders match. In fact, it's not even how I understood it. I understood it similar to the way Justin Gaethje understood it, which is if Benny wins, Benny will then be fighting for the belt. And so many times it goes that way, and people have a really hard time reconciling that. But the reconciliation is really quite obvious. I mean, in all fairness, let's say that Benny was to win. Now we're going to put Benny in there against Islam. I mean, let's just say Benny has now won 9 straight. Islam is the champion of the world, and they've been chasing each other for a while. That fight, as a matter of fact, was already booked. Somewhere it's going to get rebooked, but Joe Rogan said to not book it. We never got the full story on that, but at least you know the interest and you know the timeline. Or Islam is going to take on a guy in Charles Oliveira who's 1-1 in his last 2. Oh, by the way, the one that he lost was to this very same guy, and it wasn't remotely competitive. I'm not trying to be a dick about it. I'm sharing with you that there are very different stories, which is why Benny was the favorite going in against Charles. Everything was done right. Charles stepped up. He put on a performance. He dealt with adversity. I mean, Charles Oliveira, right? I mean, let's give him a round of applause. It was outstanding. And was it world title worthy? Yes. Yes, it was. Now, generally in a spot with a weight class as competitive as 155, we have 3 to 4 world title worthy athletes at a time. And Charles is most definitely one of them. But Charles Oliveira, just so you understand, I mean, let's be real fair with each other here. Let's be real fair. If Charles goes in against Islam, he's now 1-1 in his last 2. And one of those losses was to Islam. That's, things in this sport, there's a little bit more to it, but that's not wonderful. If Benny DeRouche got the world title fight, which he should get, they won't give it to him. He should get. If you're telling me a guy only has to win one of his last 2 and he can fight for a title, then I'll tell you a guy that won 8 of his last 9 should be able to fight for the title. Moreover, when it's a new parity against a champion who he hasn't faced before. And you're going to push back. I'm going to have a really hard time. I'm going to really struggle getting that argument over. However, we've seen people come off defeats and go into world title fights before. Particularly one where they very clearly got caught. Particularly when they've got a resume of 8 in a row. And of those 8, and I used to know this right off the top of my head, but of those 8 that Benny won, he only lost 1 round. So not only did Benny win 8 fights in a row, the math on it was fantastic. It was like he'd won 38 out of 38 rounds. It was something incredible like this. Or you have Charles Oliveira, who was losing the round of the match that he won against Benny. Oh, by the way, won none of the rounds in his last fight. So he was 0-3 in his last 3 rounds, and he's 1-1 in his last 2. Look, I know I'm being tricky with the math. Well, but I'm attempting to be. I'm attempting to demonstrate for you that we really don't know who the number one contender is. And we really just don't have number one contenders matches. And the time to say that Charles is getting the nod is gone. We could go back to it. We could revisit it. As I said, there's 3 and 4 and 5 guys that sit at the table at all times in a healthy division. We have some very unhealthy divisions where that isn't true. But 155, which is iron on top of iron, it is the toughest and deepest division, not only in the sport, in the history of the sport. 155 right now. Any organization, any way you want to do it. So, when you get in those spots and many people argue and many people are pounding their chest and banging the drum that Charles Oliveira gets the next shot, you're confronted with Charles Oliveira himself, whose coach claims was already offered a rematch with Islam and passed. You're confronted with Charles himself, who has stated in the past that fighting Islam on Fight Island is an unfair advantage to Islam. You're confronted with Charles Oliveira himself, who Sunday of last week allowed it to be posted on his verified and personal Twitter page that he, Charles Oliveira, is now fighting Conor McGregor. So, when you guys listen to me say I'm not sold that it's going to be Charles, and you send me nasty messages, I today haven't said anything other than to quote Charles himself. And that's always a very precarious spot. Because as strong of an argument as I could make that it should be Benny, that if you want to go and take resumes and look at absolute most impressive, and if that's the way we're going to do things, then it's Benny. If you go and you take Islam's account into this, you carry all what Islam has to say, who's got a proven history of integrity, of only choosing the hardest opponents, he says it should be Benny. Right? We're not going to get to Benny, guys. There's no way we're going to get to Benny. Just hear me out. Charles has limited himself every which way. Not to mention the matchmakers meeting was on Tuesday. We all knew about that. It was said it was going to be picked there, and it was not said, right? And if nothing is said, yeah, it was. There's your answer. So who else do we have? Well, we only have one other match to look at, and that's Poirier and Gaethje, and they're going to go out there and bludgeon each other. Nobody in the Poirier-Gaethje fight, if that goes all the way the first fight went, nobody is going to be fighting in October. Not the winner, not the loser. I'm just sharing that with you. And I'm not the only one that knows. You think Dana's going to disagree with me on that? You think Dana's going to go, oh, Chael, I don't know if that's accurate. I mean, I think these guys could probably take a week off and recover. We certainly got some big medical personnel and a couple of Advil and maybe an ice bag. And nobody fighting in October. That's going to be in that cage with Justin versus Dustin. So the greatest argument you could have is that for Benny, right? Charles is 1-1, says it's unfair, says he wants to do it, says he's fighting Conor McGregor. Benny beat 8 guys in a row, which included world champions along the way, won 38 out of 38 rounds, was winning the fight that we're discussing before he wasn't. Benny is the guy, but most recent wins today. We have a history in this sport of that not being true. Alexander Gustafsson put on one of the greatest light heavyweight fights of all time, and he did that as a number 1 contender for the world championship coming off of a loss, a knockout loss where he was caught. But he had done so many good things before that, they moved on with it, and he was this close to winning a world championship. Yoel Romero had a fantastic fight with Paulo Costa, but he lost. His very next fight was a 5-round main event for the strap against Israel Adesanya. I'm just sharing for you. If you guys really want to find the right opponent, I hear you continuing to say that you want to find the right guy. It's got to be the guy that makes sense. You want to find the right opponent, it's Benny. And if you think just because he lost a fight that he was winning, if you think it's not Benny, I think that you're going to have a really hard argument. Now, history's going to be on your side. But I would still submit Benny, who's 8-1 out of his last 9, versus Charles, who's 1-1 out of his last 2. I'm just suggesting that for you. Moreover, I don't think anybody's looking at Dustin and Justin. I think you're going in the wrong direction. Dustin versus Justin doesn't make sense because they're both that's going to be a massacre. They're going to need time. And where does that leave you? Where's that leave you, guys? Come on. I'm giving you time. Are you figuring this thing out yet? Volkanovski, Rodriguez. That's where it leaves you. As long as Volkanovski wins. That's the match you need to be keeping your eye on. Charles wasn't named number one contender. We all knew, okay, that kicks it to the BMF belt. Not so fast. There's one more. And the dates work out. They line up just perfectly. You still got a risk. Still need a specific guy to win. That's the match that the smart marks and the cheap seats wearing the fancy suits are looking at to find out the opponent for Islam.